Monday, November 19th, 1984, 5:45 a.m. A chain of explosions so powerful and so scorching, it was described by survivors as the very fires of hell itself, was set off at the Pemex Liquefied Petroleum gas tank farm in San Juanico, Mexico. The blast, whose angry red flames could be seen at the other end of the capital, incinerated about 600 people to ashes, injured 7,000 others, destroyed 150 houses, and left a massive crater in the earth with a radius of 200 meters. What could have happened to set off this catastrophic explosion? Was this the work of a disgruntled employee, as suggested, or was there something more sinister at play? Something that went all the way up to the highest echelons of power. Petróleos Mexicanos, or Mexican Petroleum in English, currently ranks as one of the largest oil companies in the world. The company was formed by President Lázaro Cárdenas in 1938 and till today remains owned, managed, and operated by the Mexican government, with numerous gas plants, oil wells, and pipelines all over the world. Pemex has experienced more than its fair share of fire disasters, but the San Juanico explosion is by far the most disastrous, with the most devastating outcome. Sometime in the 1950s, it became necessary to build a plant to help with the storage and distribution of liquefied petroleum gas, LPG. So in 1959, the Mexican government assigned a piece of land in San Juanico to Pemex for this reason. Unfortunately, this would turn out to be the first most tragic mistake in this whole disaster, because San Juanico was not just any place. It was a densely populated community, home to about 40,000 people, with an additional 60,000 others who lived in nearby settlements. Not exactly a great location to install a gas plant. As you'd expect from a company that supplied 1/3 of Mexico City's LPG, the Pemex San Juanico facility was vast. In that facility, there were 54 huge LPG storage tanks of varying capacities, including 6 large spherical tanks and 48 smaller-sized bullet tanks. Altogether, these tanks gave the Pemex San Juanico LPG terminal a capacity of 16,000 cubic meters. The day before the disaster, the plant's LPG supply was nearly depleted, and so arrangements were made for the plant to be refilled from a refinery about 250 miles away. The filling process began in the wee hours of November 19th, the day of the explosion, with 50 LPG tanks filled to about 90% of their capacity, and the remaining 4 tanks filled to 50%. This put the total amount of LPG held by the plant on the day of the disaster at about 11,000 to 12,000 cubic meters. Up to this point, things had been going on well, and it was just another day at the Pemex San Juanico LPG terminal. However, a few hours later, at about 5:40 a.m., something started to go horribly wrong. It was the operators in the control room that noticed the first sign of problem, and soon engineers at the pipeline pumping station did too. The pressure in the pipeline had suddenly dropped, which could only mean one thing: some pipe somewhere had ruptured. And if the engineers didn't find out what pipe it was, and fast, the whole plant was going to go down in hellish flames, guaranteed. Unfortunately for the Pemex personnel on ground, they'd spend several precious minutes looking for the cause of the pressure drop to no avail. If only they had realized early enough that it was a ruptured pipe that caused the drop in pressure that they had observed, perhaps the San Juanico disaster would have been prevented. Unfortunately, they did not. Meanwhile, as they did everything they could to get to the bottom of the problem, more and more LPG continued to leak from the ruptured pipe, resulting in the formation of a deadly gas cloud up to 7 feet high. For 10 whole minutes, the gas cloud grew and traveled unnoticed by the plant operators, who had other hypotheses on their minds besides the ruptured pipe. The northeast wind continued to move the cloud until it finally came in contact with a flare pit somewhere in the west wing of the plant. All that remained now was a spark. And that spark finally happened at precisely 5:40 a.m. on November 19th, 1984. The vapor cloud now ignited. What followed was a flash fire, immediately leading to a violent vapor cloud explosion, in which several pipelines and storage tanks were destroyed. But disaster hadn't had her fill yet. She had tasted carnage, and she was thirsty for more. Barely 90 seconds after the first blast, yet another explosion occurred. This time, one of the storage tanks had burst into flames due to overheating. A pilot flying directly over San Juanico witnessed the explosion and was convinced that a nuclear bomb had exploded in the city. 8 more of these explosions would soon follow the second blast, producing fireballs as wide as 980 feet in diameter. These explosions would then destroy several LPG tanks, sending fragments weighing up to 30 tons and even whole cylinders flying into the air like missiles, some for a distance of up to 3,900 feet. 100 trucks that had come to collect LPG for distribution also contributed to the disaster. Each of these trucks contained many household LPG cylinders, each one weighing about 20 to 40 kilograms. All 100 of the trucks were completely burned out, thanks to hundreds of smaller-scale secondary explosions. With fire destroying the San Juanico plant, both unburned and burning gas filled the air, and slowly the unholy duo began to make its way into the San Juanico neighborhood. The closest houses were only about 130 meters away from the storage tanks, and most were built from simple brick and wood. It was the perfect fuel for the ravenous San Juanico inferno, and the inferno consumed them all. By the time the traveling gases made their way to the San Juanico neighborhood, the blast waves from the explosions had already destroyed a number of houses. However, by the time gas entered the houses, it finished off what the blast waves had started, setting fire to every single thing that dared to cross its path, living and non-living. To literally add more fuel to the fire, blast waves torpedoed several LPG tanks out of position. And as each one fell to the ground, more gas was released, and the already catastrophic inferno was fed precisely what it didn't need: more gas. Emergency services were first contacted at about 5:45 a.m., after which at least 200 firemen were sent to the area within 6 hours of the first explosion. Altogether, a total of 4,000 people, including 985 medics, 1,780 paramedics, and 1,332 volunteers participated in the rescue operation. 363 ambulances and 5 helicopters were also deployed to help with rescue efforts. Still, the San Juanico fire was unforgiving. Emergency rescue workers say that the heat from the fire incinerated most corpses to ashes. In fact, some of the bodies were so badly incinerated that only about 2% of them could still be recognized by the time they were found. In the end, a total of 500 to 600 people perished in the fire, including 5 plant workers and a few firemen who had bravely tried spraying water onto some of the tanks to cool them down, only to be singed to their death when some of the tanks boiled over and exploded. Also affected by the disaster were 7,000 other people who were left severely burned and badly injured. Now the multi-million-dollar question is, what could have led to such a tragic disaster? Well, as investigations would reveal, the answer to this question is shrouded in a lot of mystery and isn't exactly straightforward. From one till date, there hasn't been a single result from a public inquiry or Pemex investigation made available to the public. The only official statement made on the case came from the Attorney General, who said that the gas escape had come from a row of bullet tanks next to the spheres. And while he did lay the blame at Pemex's door, he did also claim that the lack of plant maintenance wasn't the cause of the disaster. Other theories proposed about the cause of the San Juanico disaster were mostly hearsay. The Mexican Petroleum Institute, IMP, for instance, claimed that it was a disgruntled employee who sabotaged the plant, declaring further investigations to be unnecessary. But this seemed too simplistic and even suspiciously evasive. It wasn't until a team of Dutch scientists from the Netherlands Organization for Applied Scientific Research investigated the site for scientific purposes, however, that the real story behind the San Juanico fire disaster was revealed. According to the report, the initial leak that set off everything else was likely to have been caused by extremely high pressure and subsequent rupture in one of the tanks. This overpressure could have been reduced if only Pemex had installed relief valves on the receive pipelines. Relief valves are devices that help to release excessive pressure in piping systems, but Pemex didn't have a relief valve installed on its pipes, which allowed the pressure to continue to build up until the pipe finally burst. Worse still, pipelines and tanks were not isolated. Instead, they were packed close together. So when the first ignition took place, the tight cluster of tanks and pipelines accelerated the transition of the initial flash fire into a violent vapor cloud explosion. It was this violent vapor cloud explosion that then caused several other pipes to rupture, leading to the inferno that heated other tanks until the gas in them boiled over and they exploded. It also definitely didn't help matters that long after the explosions went off and the fire started, LPG was still being pumped into the San Juanico plant at the usual rate. This meant that the fire was being supplied with a steady stream of LPG, which served to further aggravate the fire. Now, if the San Juanico LPG plant had not been as close to residential buildings as it was, perhaps the disaster could have been managed. In fact, initially, there were no residential homes close to the San Juanico plant. But unfortunately, poor land use planning and city expansion gradually started allowing for residential homes to be built closer and closer to the plant, placing innocent people in the direct line of fire. Perhaps the U.S. Department of Transportation, which conducted an informal investigation on the San Juanico disaster, summarized it best when it said that the main cause of the disaster had been the human element, maintenance problems, and inadequate relief capacity and pressure control. In the aftermath of the San Juanico disaster, the Mexican government's response was disappointing. Not only have official investigation results remained unavailable till date, the president and other high-ranking officials also boycotted the funeral ceremony and mass burial of 272 victims of the fire. This sent a strong message to the people of Mexico, and the message wasn't a good one. Today, the impact of the San Juanico disaster can be seen at every level of process safety in the global oil and gas industry. For instance, the American Petroleum Institute now demands that gas plants avoid over-clustering their facilities. Also, gas plants as large as San Juanico now have to implement a compulsory 300-meter safety distance between their facility and residential houses. Now, we wish we could tell you that all of these measures helped to prevent a recurrence of such a disaster in the future, but this ain't no fairy tale. In 1996, another fire disaster would strike again at another Pemex site in San Juanico. Unfortunate coincidence or not? Well, that's a story for another day. Watch these videos next if you found this video interesting. Thanks for watching. Please hit like and subscribe for more.